just beside me and probably below me are probably a couple hundred Irish immigrants. I'm just gonna say it, I am extremely uncomfortable in here right now. Is it okay to video or no? I thought I was gonna come here and see absolutely no sign of the Irish history. Instead, when I get here, so while getting ready to celebrate for St. Patrick's Day this year, I thought it would be pretty interesting to try my best at learning a bit more about the festival and, the holiday and what it's all about. As I was digging into it, I realized that there was just an entire deep rabbit hole of Irish history in Toronto that I had absolutely no idea about. And the further and further I got down that rabbit hole, the more I thought, this is a story that needs to be amplified. It's a shame that a lot of the history is hidden or has been torn down over the years. And so what I figured I'd do is come out here today and walk through the city, drive through the city, and bring you on a journey, and for me, a journey as well, through a massive moment in Toronto's history driven by the Irish people. So where is this video starting? Well, just behind me outside here is the corner of Front Street and Simcoe Street. And this is the place that thousands of Irish immigrants landed when they tried to come to Toronto in 1847. So between the years of 1845 and 1852, Ireland and the people of Ireland suffered through the Great Famine, also known as the Potato Famine. And this was just an absolute disaster for the people of Ireland. In a nutshell, the potato crops failed. The people there were very over-reliant on the crop. And that's a high-level story. There's a lot more to this story, like the fact that they were still exporting food out of Ireland during that time, and the British government, who had rule over the island at the time, not doing enough to assist the people. This video isn't necessarily to go into the details of that, but to talk about what happened when these people came to Toronto. And so the Great Famine, 1 million people died, 1 million people left. They really had no choices. It was either stay in Ireland and starve to death, or try to get on a boat that was so horrible that they called the death coffins at the time, and try to see if you can make your way somewhere. I chuckle not because of how funny the situation is, but just the absurdity of how an entire island of people could be subject to such horror. And even today, if you combine the population of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, all of the people on the island of Ireland, the population there still hasn't recovered to where it was before the start of the Great Famine. In 1847, on the shores of Toronto, 40,000 Irish immigrants landed. And to put that into context, at the time, Toronto's population was only about 20,000 total. And where they landed, you may think if you're a native of Toronto, it would be down by the water, down by Queen's Quay, down there by the waterfront today. But actually, Toronto's shoreline used to go all the way up to Front Street. Like, Front Street was the Front Street of Toronto back in the day. And this is where the people of Ireland would have landed on their ship, at Reese's Wharf. Where is Reese's Wharf today? Well, Reese's Wharf was at the foot of Simcoe Street. Today, that location is the Metro Toronto Convention Center. And you can just try to imagine the sight of the people of Toronto seeing these disease-stricken ships just sailing up, coming up, all of these starving Irish people. And if you're the Irish immigrant, if you made it all the way to Toronto, you were extremely lucky. You somehow survived the famine in Ireland. You somehow got past the first stop, which was an island in Quebec, where they would quarantine you. And then by some sheer luck and miracle, you landed on the shore of Toronto. So why was this place named Reese's Wharf? Well, it was named after a guy named Dr. Reese. He had, I'm sure it was a prominent title at the time, but a slightly hilarious title. He was the first superintendent of the Provincial Lunatic Asylum. So if you ever wondered where the word lunatic came from, apparently it was standard for certain medical centers back in the day. And he worked there until one of the patients hit him on the head so hard that it messed up his vision for the rest of his life. And because he couldn't see straight, he had to stand down from the role. And I guess he was making a lot of money and he wanted to diversify his investments. So he decided to invest in building a wharf. A wharf can make you a lot of money. Ships have to pay a docking fee. There was a lot of industry going in and out at the ports in Toronto, and I'm sure he could never have predicted the absolute humanitarian crisis that would take place at his wharf in 1847. And this brings me to the start of some of the main reasons why I'm making this video. Like, why is it that at the corner of Front and Simcoe Street, at the place of one of the most significant humanitarian crises that have taken place in this city, there isn't a single plaque anywhere to be seen to commemorate the fact that this corner, this part of Toronto, was Reese's Wharf. And I'm now on the south side of the Metro Toronto Convention Center, and all of this behind me, all of these buildings would have been completely underwater at the time. Another absurdity is, at the time, in the Metro Toronto Convention Center was Comic-Con. So juxtapose 40,000 starving, nearly dead Irish immigrants landing at this corner and a bunch of people live action role playing their favorite comics. I'm walking through here and I feel like I hear the voices of these Irish people like screaming at me to not forget what happened here. So I just came inside, and today at the Metro Toronto Convention Center, there was a yoga convention going on. So again, the juxtaposition of a bunch of people here trying to find their inner peace, their inner chi, and 40,000 languishing Irish immigrants in 1847 just trying to survive. It's interesting. We're going to be following the journey of these Irish immigrants in this video. So you made it to Toronto, but you got here and you're terribly sick, like everyone was. Well, you'd probably be sent up to Toronto's first hospital, which is where we're going to today. It is so beautiful outside today. The sun is sunning. There's fresh snow on the ground. I feel like I got a bit of the luck of the Irish with the weather today. So I'm inside the Toronto International Film Festival building, and I thought that there would be no sign of the original hospital that was here that took care of so many sick and dying Irish immigrants. But this video playing right behind me is actually showing a video that was made before the construction of this building, talking about this exact story of the immigrants coming here, the fever sheds, all of it. So I thought I was going to come here and see absolutely no sign of the Irish history. Instead, when I get here, I'm greeted with a video that documents the Irish history here. And at the same time, it's the Irish Film Festival happening this weekend. I don't know if that's a bunch of coincidences, the fact that I'm here when all of this is happening, but I'm not complaining. I'm actually very impressed and quite happy that it's here. So the fourth floor is supposedly where a lot of the Irish artifacts are, but it's around 11:30 right now, and the library with the artifacts and everything else in the museum doesn't open until 12. So now we wait. At least I have a pretty entertaining view. So here I am at the Film Reference Library on the fourth floor of the TIFF building. Before this place was TIFF, it was actually the location of York General Hospital, Toronto's first civilian hospital. So it opened in 1829, and the reason why they call it the first civilian hospital is because before that, the hospitals were only really meant for the military men, the people going out fighting the wars, doing those things. But I suppose as Toronto got bigger and bigger, they needed a proper formal facility to just take care of the local people who happen to get sick or injured or fall ill. In that time period of 1847, when all of the Irish immigrants were coming through, they were all right, so I got to be completely transparent here. I'm having a really hard time filming this right now. When I came into this room, the person who works here let me know that there is spiritual activity within this building. Some of the heads over here tend to turn upside down, like kind of turn over. As well, the printer back here tends to have a habit of, doing interesting things. And just as I came into this room after I was left alone, I was filming by the printer, which we were already standing by for a very long period of time, and it turned itself on, logged itself in, and I had nothing to do with that.
Oh my god. Alright, well hello, just trying to make a video. Please be nice. I mean, disrespect. Thank you. Just trying to tell a story. That's all.
So I know there's some all right, now the video on the TV screen over to my right is playing something terrifying. I don't know what this is. All right, and as soon as I pointed my camera on, it changed. But anyway, I'm just gonna say it. I am extremely uncomfortable in here right now, but to whatever, spirit may be with me right now, I just want to let you know I'm trying to tell this story in the most respectful way possible. And please allow me to do this comfortably, and we'll be able to get through it. All right. So back to the video. So like we said, if you made it and survived and made it to Reese's Wharf, you would probably end up, if you were still sick, somewhere around here at York General Hospital. Now, this was not a big hospital. This was built to maybe take care of 100 people at a time. So when you have 40,000 Irish immigrants being processed, most of them, if not all of them, sick, what are you going to do? Well, if you were lucky, maybe you got in the hospital, but the vast majority ended up in these massive fever sheds. So you had 6 days that you were allowed to be in the fever shed. If you were still feeling bad after those 6 days, tough luck, they just throw you out. There is this display over here on the shoulder where they actually have some artifacts, amazingly, of the Irish immigrants that were here at that time. When they were doing construction to build the TIFF building, they found a harp brooch. Harp is very popular symbolism in Irish culture. And to see the harp brooch, to see a physical representation of the people that were here and where the fever sheds must have been, is incredible. And for me, it's a moment of reflection where, because it's so hard to find Toronto's history because it's all paved over, for me to go from starting this video just being curious about St. Patrick's Day to being up in a haunted 4th floor film reference library looking at a harp brooch from an Irish immigrant where it's all probably maybe even 200 years old, it is ridiculous.
All right, now I'm hearing things.
And one last thing that I find so interesting is the location. So we're at the corner of King and John. If you're from Toronto, you know exactly that's in the heart of the entertainment district. So again, you have another juxtaposition. People doing crawls along King Street, going out, having fun. And right in the core of it is one of the most significant pieces of history for this city, the first hospital. So where do we go to from here? Well, not only were the Irish immigrants dying, but there were a lot of people that wanted to distance themselves as far as they could from the suffering population. So who was left to take care of them? Well, there were some of the local doctors who would do it, as well as one very important man, which we're going to speak a lot more about next. His name was Michael Power. All right, so I feel like I've overstayed my welcome at this former hospital location. So now it's time for the next stop on this immigrant journey.
Just making a video. Is that okay? If not, I can delete it if it's not okay.
I'm not in a position to say.
Not to say? Okay.
I'm not in a position to say you can take video.
You can't video? What did you say, sorry? Is it okay to video or no?
I said I'm not in a position to say it's okay or not.
Oh, okay. Then you know what? I'm not even gonna. I don't want to be disrespectful or anything. I was actually the video is talking about
So now it's time to talk about the man that I alluded to at the end of the last clip, which was Bishop Michael Power. So currently I'm standing outside of St. Michael's Cathedral Basilica, and this is the final resting place down in the crypt of Michael Power. So Michael Power was the first bishop of Toronto, and he was an amazing man. In January of 1847, wanted to grow the presence of the Catholic Church in Toronto. To do that, he decided to go on a trip to Ireland. And when he went to Ireland, he was shocked by what he saw: famine, languish. And while he was there, it was so dire that he wrote a letter back to be read in all of the Catholic churches saying, these immigrants are coming to Toronto. They are going to need a lot of help. And so when they did come to Toronto, he would go down to the beaver sheds and read them their last rites as they'd pass away. And he also would help care to these people. And ultimately, he paid the greatest price for it. Later on that year, I believe in October, he passed away from typhus that he likely caught from all of the people he was helping in the fever sheds. Typhus was one of the most common ways that the Irish immigrants would pass away. And the reason he went to Ireland, some of the funds that he wanted to get were to help build what now has become St. Michael's Cathedral Basilica, because before that, he was in charge of St. Paul's Basilica, the first basilica in Toronto. And so when he passed away, St. Michael's was still under construction, and they put his body down underneath the altar. And after the completion of the church, he is now still in that same resting place. To be down there and see where this man is resting, there is a feeling that, there's something more to this day-to-day life that we live, and it seems like he knew that. The church is in a slightly dodgy part of town, and as I was filming that, there was a very scary man across the street, so I had to move along. But one last thing that I want to say too is, although the memorial is going to be at the next church that we go to, Basilica, to the right of the altar is a statue of St. Patrick himself holding the shamrock. So in an incredibly, esteemed place near the altar, there's a lot of commemorance for the Irish past of this church. Just right behind me, we have St. Paul's Basilica. The basilica that's there today is actually kind of new. It was opened in 1889, but before that, opened in 1822, was the original Gothic-style church that Bishop Michael Power would have had authority over. Of course, the congregation is still the oldest in Toronto, but the new building that we see here today is more Romanesque, has the more Roman features, but still incredibly beautiful building. And as I've said, Toronto with its history of just demolishing, getting rid of all of the originals, at least they kept the bell. So the bell at the top of the church is actually the original bell from the original Gothic style basilica. Although a lot of the other places that I've been to today, I feel anguish, I feel a sense of unease, I feel disturbance. When I was in the basilica there, I actually felt for the first time today a sense of peace. Some of the parishioners were in there. The priest was in there. It looked like he was doing some consultations with someone who works there. And, maybe it's the fact that this is where people came to rest and they found that peace. I don't know, but there was a pleasant energy inside. And so that, of course, takes us to, well, if you weren't lucky and you weren't able to survive the fever sheds and the hospital stay, a lot of Irish people were Catholics. And the only and first Catholic graveyard at the time was right out back behind this church. Now, since then, it's actually been paved over and is the site of a children's playground, believe it or not, but a lot of the remains of those original Irish immigrants are still there. There seems to be this interesting history where Toronto seems to forget that those remains are there about every 100 to 50 years or so. Most recent example of that was at the school, St. Paul's Catholic School, the oldest Catholic school in Toronto. They were looking at expanding it because Toronto's growing so fast, and a local historian had to remind them, hey, we can't really renovate the playground because underneath there, the way our guidelines work is that you have to try to contact all of the relatives of the remains that you find at the site, which is pretty impractical when there's potentially hundreds of remains down there. And then I came across this article in the 1950s where when they were actually digging the basement for the school, the construction guy dug up human remains and the local boys started tossing the bones and playing back and forth with the bones in the street. And when they get tired of one bone, they would go dig and find another. So, pretty grim stuff, but it just goes to show that if we don't do a good enough job educating and making note of these stories and telling these stories and showing these places, even if what was there before isn't there, the history will just be gone and the lessons that we've learned won't stick around. Just beside me and probably below me are the final resting place of probably a couple hundred Irish immigrants. They thought at the time that they moved all of the bodies, but I suppose they missed some. And while there isn't much in the way of signage, there is this plaque just here that says, in memory of those Irish immigrants who didn't make it. And while, the feeling beside the Basilica was hope, redemption, warmth, the feeling outside the Basilica, behind the back, the unmarked grave that's been paved over for a playground and parking lot, it's more of a feeling of despair, feel of hope that just didn't quite make it, but a feeling that they tried and they did the best they could. But this all happened in the 1840s, so does that mean any of this is still relevant today? Well, that's where we're going next, because really this isn't dead history, and this story is still actively playing a role in Toronto. So this brings us to the park that was built in 2007 to commemorate the journey that we just went on. And here they have a number of sculptures depicting Irish immigrants who would have been struggling, would have been starving. And these statues actually have their own counterpart in Dublin, Ireland. To signify the loss and the tragedy that was involved with all of this, there's fewer statues here than there are in Dublin, emphasizing just how many people died on the journey over to the New World. So while we focus mainly on all of the immigrants that didn't make it, a lot of them did. By the end of the famine and the immigration wave, Irish people were the largest ethnic group within Toronto. A lot of them settled in the east end of the city. The reason for that was the east end was the less desirable part of town. Wind typically blows in Toronto west to east, and Toronto actually used to be called the Big Smoke at the time when it was still York because of all the industry in the area and the big smokestacks. And so all of the people with means would be in the west part of the city and the north part of the city, upwind of all the smoke, but downwind of the smoke in the east end was where a lot of the Irish would settle. They would settle in a community now called Cabbage Town, which is named after them growing cabbage in their front yard just as a cheap way to eat something to get by. And a common misconception is Corktown is named after an old cork plant in the area. Turns out that's not the case. Corktown is actually named after County Cork and the massive number of people from Ireland who moved there and lived there. And even if you got set up there, I mean, it wasn't easy. You had to find work quick. You had to find food quick. Begging was illegal. If a policeman found you begging, straight to jail. But they'd made it. They'd somehow, against all the odds, found a place to settle. Now, Ireland Park here, it kind of sneaks up on you. As I was walking over here, there was a man with his 2 little kids, and they turned the corner and he goes, "Oh, what are these weird guys?" Right? Because it's hidden behind this big malt building, these old stacks down by the water. So you can't even see any of these statues if you're just cruising along the main walkway near here. I myself have been victim of this. I was walking around here once in the summer. I turned the corner and all of a sudden I see these horrific, just drawn out, hollow, struggling statues. Had no idea what it was about, but of course now I do. And they throw up their hands towards the city as if it's not only just, hey, we're trying to survive here, but it's also just, hey, can any of you help us? We've come this far. We've landed on your shore. Can any of you help us? And like I said, the history is far from over. While this was opened in 2007, and they actually named the street that it's on Erin Street, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but the Irish pronunciation and spelling of Ireland. Another park was actually opened in 2021 called Grasset Park. And again, apologies if I'm saying that wrong, but it was named after another doctor during that time, much like Michael Power, who was there tending to the sick and ultimately died of typhus within the same year. The park, these structures, I remember walking underneath them with a friend, of course, before I knew any of this, and I'm like, what is this modern statue? Why does Toronto keep doing these? Like, why don't we make beautiful art anymore? But it turns out that it's actually meant to symbolize the beaver sheds and the tents that the immigrants had to stay in. And on the ground underneath is carved out an old map of Toronto. And on it, you can see what the map was like in 1847 when the people would have landed there. You see a big silver line in the ground that symbolizes Reese's Wharf, where so many of the Irish came. And as well, you see, the old hospital that we've been speaking about and that we actually visited. And interestingly enough, while I was researching for this video, the government of Ireland and Canada announced a partnership where the government of Ireland is investing $2 million into renovating one of the old buildings for, again, this old malt, brewing or whatever it is, tower. And it's called the Corlech Building, which is named after, I believe it's an ancient head. It's going to be a place where it represents, people going there, immigrating and trying to make a life in Canada. It's mainly focused on Irish culture and Irish impact, but it's a place for any immigrant coming to Toronto, which is a really common story here because half the population is immigrants here. I was pleasantly surprised coming out here. I didn't think there would be anything for me to see, and it seems like every place I go, there's a little bit of what used to be there. Not as much as I'd like, but more than nothing, which is good. So I hope you liked coming along on this journey and exploring, Toronto's dark, but, compassionate to some degree Irish history, and can't wait for the next adventure. See ya.